Welcome back, everyone, to the Rebel Nutritionist podcast. Today, guess what? You get me, yours truly, as a solo podcast episode because we've got lots to talk about. And I'm going to make it short and sweet, but I really want to give you some information. So today, we will be talking about things like BT toxins and leaky gut. What is that exactly? Glyphosate and the hidden carcinogen in so many of the foods that we eat, why there's an issue with Kellogg's cereals, what that's about, agriculture and chemical companies, the connection between health, plastic in our brains. Yes, we will be talking about that. The rigged healthcare system and ultra processed food versus tobacco. So stay tuned. We're going to get into all of that in just a minute. We've been getting a lot of questions. There's been a lot of talk in the media, social media about these topics. And I feel like it's particularly important and timely now to really go through and address some of these things, like what is going on with our food supply, what's in our food, and why do we need to be paying attention to it, and how far reaching these issues are. So today we're going to cover topics like BT toxins and leaky gut. If you want to know, if we want to go more in depth on any of these, please send me your questions on them because I can certainly do that. But in the essence of the context and the time today, I want to highlight these things because these are things I really want you guys to pay attention to as you go food shopping, as you become more aware of what's going on with our food supply. Because I think now more than ever, well, I think it's always been a thing, but I think now more than ever, it's really coming to light. There's been a lot of meetings in Washington with top executives from, well, not even executives. I mean, executives from some of these companies that are willing to come out and talk about it, but grassroots effort by so many individuals that are looking to, and some organizations that are really looking to make change in our food supply and what we eat and what we have access to. So BT toxins and leaky gut, for example, glyphosate, what that is and why it's such a huge concern for us. Things like what's going on with Kellogg's. If you've heard the whole thing, the Food Babe has been really instrumental in bringing to light the chemicals in our food. Kellogg's, the cereal company, or it's a Kellogg's, and the cereals they produce, amongst them. Agriculture and chemical companies, what's going on there? Plastic in our brains. Yes, you heard that correctly. Plastic in our brains. The rigged healthcare system, what's going on with that? And ultra processed food versus tobacco. What is the link there? We're going to dive into all of that today and cover these topics. Again, it's going to be more the 30,000-foot view today, but my hope is that we get you guys fired up about wanting to know more about this, and we will do more of a deep dive on this. But first and foremost, really want you to become more aware of what's going on with our food and why we need to pay such close attention to the foods that we are eating and to the foods that we are feeding our family. Children are very susceptible to these chemicals. Their brains are highly susceptible. So we're wondering, like, what's going on with our children with rises of things like autism and ADD and ADHD and even childhood illnesses and cancers and things like that. Guess what? Can be linked directly back to some of the things that we are going to talk about today. So please be sure to like, to subscribe, to share any of this information. It's so important in getting it out there. Share with people that you know, and make sure you subscribe to stay connected to us and in the know about all of these things that we are going to continue to talk about. So let's start with BT toxins. So BT toxins are a certain kind of toxin that comes from, it's actually a pesticide or a fungicide that's used. And it is used in agriculture. And what has been found, so a lot of these things, glyphosate originally was labeled as safe. BT toxins were originally labeled as generally safe for human consumption. And when I'm talking about, when these things came out back in the 60s and 70s and even earlier, the pesticide, fungicide revolution links back, or is connected back to World War II, when some of those the the poisons and the chemicals that were used in chemical warfare during wartime from Germany were actually exported to the US, and we started using them, agriculture started using them on crops. Like that's when a lot of this first started. So this has been in our food supply for a very, very long time. And what we know is, there's now hundreds and hundreds of chemicals in our food supply that do nefarious things. They are not good for us. And yet somehow this is not mainstream. We are not talking about this. Well, not until now. And I often um, diss social media because of the misinformation that it can spew. Well, I mean, look, it's in this on this topic too. I think there's certainly its fair share of fallacies. But what I do want to commend all of these people who are out there doing this work is that they are bringing a really, really important subject to light. And kudos to all of you who were in Washington in the last few weeks that raise this awareness and raise these questions. And look, we are not getting political. I don't get political on any of this, but I do think um, I really have to give it to Robert Kennedy, who has been bringing a lot of these issues to the forefront and talking about how do we make our families, our children, ourselves healthy in light of what is going on with our healthcare system and these companies that really are just not doing the right thing by us Americans. So, like I said, not political, but I do love his message. So, that's what we're going to talk about. Like I said, agriculture. We talked about the plastic and ultra processed food versus tobacco. Is there a similarity there? Yes, we're going to get into that, and here we go. So let's talk about BT toxins, and leaky gut. Leaky gut, for those of you, just to kind of recap, we've done some podcasts on that, but leaky gut is when the lining of the intestines start to kind of pull apart and become a little more susceptible to damage and to damage from toxins that come in the body. And what happens is the lining and the cells of the gut start to just gently pull apart. And so toxins and bacteria and organisms go through into the areas where it shouldn't be and triggers an immune response and triggers all kinds of symptoms. And so, again, I have a whole podcast on leaky gut and what that is. But suffice to say, leaky gut is not something we want to be dealing with. It can cause all kinds of problems in our body, wreak havoc on our system, cause all kinds of symptoms, from GI symptoms to brain symptoms. Brain fog and memory issues come as a result of an impaired digestive system. And that's what leaky gut is. It's an impaired, imbalanced digestive system. So these toxins are causing issue with our digestive system. It's changing the bacteria in our digestive system. It's causing more bad bacteria to grow. When there's more bad bacteria growing, we get more infection. We get more of an immune response. So oftentimes even skin issues, right? We see more eczema. We see even things like psoriasis and acne as a result of these toxins that go in and eat up the gut. So we do know there is a correlation between some of the toxins that are used in agriculture and now what we're seeing in humans. So the other thing that is really become a big topic is glyphosate. Glyphosate is an ingredient used in something called Roundup, right? You guys have heard Roundup. It's like the weed killer Roundup. Some of you may have it in your homes. Hopefully you won't have it in there too much longer. But glyphosate has seen a huge increase since its introduction in 1974. So it was initially used by farmers to control weeds, right? Weeds that are growing in their crops. And what happened was the more people used it, the more that it was then used with what we call genetically modified crops. So Monsanto, who is the maker of Roundup, found that this was so effective that then they started creating Roundup ready crops, meaning seeds like soy, now it's been wheat, and we'll talk about the crops that have been affected. but soy was genetically modified so that it would resist the spraying, the Roundup, but that everything else around that would die. And so it controlled the weeds that way. And then, but then the company just kept making more and more of these genetically modified seeds to resist the spraying of this insecticide or resist dying, being killed by the insecticide, but yet the insecticide would kill everything else. Problem is the insecticide was so effective at killing everything else that it completely now has deteriorated our cropland. And if you guys want to know more about that and how pervasive this damage is and how it's damaging to our entire ecosystem, go watch the movie Kiss the Ground. Unbelievable. Will really give you some insight into just how nefarious these companies are and what's going on in our agricultural world. So anyway, the Roundup Ready crops were introduced in like the 1990s, and we know glyphosate has been linked to serious health concerns, including cancer. There have been numerous, I mean, like hundreds of lawsuits against Monsanto, which is now Bayer, by the way. Bayer bought Monsanto. And it's millions at this point, it's probably billions of dollars that have been handed out in payment for these people who come down with things like non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And it is now classified as a probable carcinogen by the World Health Organization. Suffice to say, it is 100% a carcinogen. We've seen studies that have shown glyphosate disrupts hormone balance. It causes oxidative damage to DNA. So it is actually going in and damaging DNA. It affects the bacteria in our gut. It harms the beneficial good bacteria in our gut. So now we're seeing glyphosate, and we're talking about the Bt toxins and other toxins that, I mean, there's hundreds of other toxins that do this. So just imagine the cumulative effect that these toxins have on our body, because it is cumulative. It's not just Roundup. It's not just the Bt toxins. It's all of these other toxins. So if you think about the hundreds of chemicals that are sprayed on our crops, on our agriculture, it's just mind-blowing. So we know that the widespread use of glyphosate, and I am reading because I want to make sure I cover these topics, but the widespread use has led to contamination of food products, including food products that are labeled as organic and non-GMO. So this is a pervasive problem because we know that these glyphosate contaminated crops are getting into even the most pristine of the food supply. So how do we avoid glyphosate exposure? We really want to start to look for, we're starting to see now products that are being labeled as glyphosate residue free. And so buy organic foods as much as possible. Again, it's not going to be 100% guaranteed that you're not going to get, but remember, reduced exposure is certainly better than known exposure. So, and crops that we know that are not treated with glyphosate, glyphosate formulas. So foods that are most likely to be contaminated. So here are the crops that are most likely to be contaminated with glyphosate. Things like soy for sure, wheat, rice, corn, some fruits and vegetables. And this is why buying organic as much as possible. Certainly organic, non-GMO. Again, as much as we can control it, really important, because we know that glyphosate and all of those other chemicals, it's not just sprayed on the fruit. People say, well, if I peel it, no, all of these things go into the soil. All of your food is grown in soil. So the more pristine, the more clean the soil, the cleaner your food is going to be. Plus, we know that these chemicals actually denature the nutritional value. Right. So like there's been some studies done. There's been like there were studies done on spinach. There were studies done on pears, for example. Like I know in order to get the nutritional value of what a pear was like in 1970, you'd have to eat like 4 pears now. Like it's just ridiculous. Right. So Try to uh, buy organic, GMO free as much as possible. Despite the regulatory bodies like the EPA and the FDA being slow to address this issue, independent testing has revealed that high levels of glyphosate are in common foods. So, how do we avoid that? Support local farmers. Again, use organic practices like maybe grow your own fruit and vegetables. This is a great way to ensure that you're not getting on the glyphosate residue. And look for companies that are testing. So I did a podcast with the glyphosate girl a couple of weeks ago, Kelly Ryerson. Amazing podcast. If you guys haven't heard it, go back and listen to it because she and I go more in depth into all of this and expose some of this. But she has done recently a independent testing of many companies that you would think. So, like, and I am going to expose them. Bonza pasta, who I used to use, right? It's the chickpea pasta, chickpea pizza crusts, and those kinds of things that are made from chickpeas. She did a independent testing on them, came up with some of the highest residue of glyphosate. Bob's Red Mill, the wheat. I mean, people have been advocating and talking to Bob's Red Mill for years. I want to say since even 2015, since it came out, that they had high residues of glyphosate. So we really need to push these companies who we assume are doing things in our best interest, and they're not testing for this glyphosate. So we know maybe not genetically modified, maybe it even says organic. Some of the stuff, the Bob's Red Mill, I think the one that was tested was not organic, but just beware of things like the flours that you're using, even the alternative flours, chickpea flours, almond flours. You got to be really, really careful. So we want to make sure that we are as informed about things like glyphosate as possible. We also want to look at, so that's glyphosate. We talked about BT toxins. Again, things I want you to be aware of. Kellogg's cereal. What is the deal with Kellogg's cereal? Is that recently, as I said, a lot of these advocacy groups have been to Washington to really kind of push this issue home. And so what there was an example of was the cereals like Fruit Loops or, Lucky Charms or whatever, that in the UK and in the European countries, there's like 4 ingredients in these cereals, whereas in the United States, it's like a litany list of ingredients, most of which you cannot pronounce, most of which are chemically derived and have additives and preservatives and things like that. So we know additives and coloring, food coloring, affects brain health. And it's especially like, forget about all the sugar that's in these cereals. Like, go look at the sugar contents in these cereals. That's mind blowing enough, right? These children should not be eating cereal like this. It's like, here's your dose of sugar in the morning. And that makes our brains just, especially children's brains, like we wonder why they have ADD and ADHD. Well, you feed a kid a bunch of sugar and guess what? And with the zero nutritional value, and that's what's going to happen. But in addition to the sugar, it has additives and coloring. And those food colorings actually disrupt the neurotransmitters, the chemicals in the brain that allow children to concentrate and focus and that make them excited. Like, it actually causes like this, what we call hot brain, this, excitatory boom, boom, boom. Like, imagine like a ping pong ball going off of a wall. Like, that's what's going on in these kids' brains when they consume these additives and these chemicals. So again, we can go in much more depth, but I wanted to highlight this, and I'm talking fast. I get excited about all of this, but because I want to cover everything, and I'm trying to kind of lump it into this episode that's not too long because I want you guys to pay attention and get on, whether it's social media, and go follow like The Real Foodology and Food Babe and Glyphosate Girl and Dr. Callie Means. And we'll put all of this in the Callie and Casey Means, who are doing tremendous work in this area in terms of, bringing these important subjects to light. So that's the Kellogg's thing. So if you go onto the Food Babes Instagram, she's got the petition. I urge you, I've signed it, my staff has signed it, like, go sign this petition urging Kellogg's to get this crap out of the food that we are eating and that our children are eating. So, and that just speaks to food regulations. We talked about the FDA. I mean, I can think of a few choice words to say for the FDA, but trust me, they are just as in cahoots with the pharmaceutical industry and big food and big pharma. So, big pharma, big food, big government, like they're all together on this. And so, it's not like you can separate one from the other. So, I don't really personally trust anything that comes out of the FDA. Um, let's talk about agriculture and chemical companies where we traced back, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, about how the pesticides and fungicides and all of these products started to become pervasive in our food supply. And so these chemical companies have just played a huge role. Like the more farmers have relied on, the one thing doesn't work anymore, they go to something else, and now they double duty on it. Like the number of contaminants and toxins that get sprayed. Like, have you ever seen anybody spraying, like the commercials for the crops being sprayed? How the person doing the spraying is all like get made up in protective gear, right? They have on the suit, they have on the face mask, and that they're spraying the food that you're eating, and yet they have to be covered. Like, just think about how toxic it is if they have to be like gloved head to toe, should be protected from this stuff. Like that to me is the biggest like oxymoron in all of this. So, so suffice to say that there are just too many chemicals to count that are being sprayed on the food. And I don't know if you guys have heard this, but we do know that when the cord blood, the amniotic blood or the umbilical cord is tested at birth, that babies are coming out already toxic, right? Because mom's toxic, baby's coming out toxic. So if we wonder why we're seeing such a spike in childhood illnesses, in brain diseases, in things like that, guys, it's environmental. We have got to start paying attention to all of these things. And, I'm not trying to be the Debbie Downer here, but I think it's really important that we are informed about what is going on with our food supply and all of the things. It's not just glyphosate. It's not just the BT toxins. It's the additives. It's the chemicals that are, BHT, which is a preservative, is a known carcinogen. Go look on the cereal box. It is in there. BHT as a preservative, known carcinogen. So you just pile on these carcinogens after carcinogens, and we wonder why we are sick. So that's the agricultural tie, and the chemical companies, they are just in cahoots there. And we just don't see any sign of that stopping unless we kind of put a stop to it, right? We have to be that voice. Plastic in our brains. That's another conversation that's come up. Yes, I said it right. Plastic in our brains, right? We know that plastics are everywhere. If you guys are not drinking out of like glass or stainless and you're still drinking out of those plastic bottles, you're storing your food in plastic, it is like it's in chewing gum, it's in the wrappers of everything, it's in the receipts that you get from the store, and they're just everywhere. And these microplastics, we know they invade the liver, we know they invade the kidneys. Well, guess what? Now we're finding that 0.5%, 0.5% of our brain's weight, like that's significant, is now contains microplastics. So we say, oh, well, we're seeing now a rise in brain disorders and cognitive disorders and Alzheimer's. Like this is a thing. So we've got to start paying attention to where all these plastics going. Like we're drinking plastic, we're not thinking about it, we're keeping it in the sunlight, we keep it in our cars, like all of that plastic that gets broken down. Guess what? The body has to do something with it, and the body has to get rid of it. And if your body is not functioning at 100%, right? If you're not detoxifying because you're not eating a good, healthy, nutritionally supported diet, and if you're under stress and you're not sleeping well and all of these lifestyle things, now just think of how this is compounded. So we're just compounding thing after thing after thing in our bodies that our bodies can't handle. And so brain issues are a big one. So get those plastics out of your brain. The other thing is, well, I just mentioned about how the FDA, the pharmaceutical company, yeah, they're kind of all in cahoots. So here's what I want to tell you. The messaging that, comes out and media outlets, forget about social media, I think is the best place in some cases to get more of the real answers, because whether it's television commercials or even the news, I'm going to tell you, the news is funded by big pharma. The news is funded by these companies that have an agenda. Newsflash. So I don't really trust much of what comes out of mainstream media. And and they just don't talk about these topics. They'll talk about health and they'll tell you about medications, but how are they telling you to get off your medications or to do things that are natural? You don't hear it, right? So there's definitely an agenda there. So be very careful on where you get your information and who you're trusting to get your information from, what the source of that is. This is why I'm doing these. Like, we want to expose these people at a high level so that we can start to get some change happening, and it's going to happen at the grassroots level. That's how it's happening, right? These people, these activists have been around for a very long time talking about it, and it's finally coming to light. So again, so happy about that. So let's talk about ultra processed foods and big tobacco, right? What are the disturbing similarities between the marketing strategies of ultra processed food and the tobacco industry? They're kind of the same. Why? Because they're targeting young people. And the cigarette companies always did that. They targeted the younger people to that it was cool to do this, right? So you think about it, why does your child not want to take lunch to school? Well, if this kid has, the candy and the this and the that, like, that's the cool kid who has all the junk, but, you're stigmatized for bringing healthy food. How do we flip that? How do we make bringing healthy food to school as a school lunch the thing to do? Right? Because bring Lunchables, like, guys, these Lunchables, there's nothing redeeming in these. Packaged and processed foods are these what we call hyper palatable foods, are leading to disordered eating behaviors in kids because they don't even, they nature can't mimic what these ultra processed foods taste like. The sweetness and the mouthfeel, they're designed to be like this. Like, this is what these companies pay millions of dollars for in marketing and strategic development so that they become addictive. And so don't get lost in these claims. Like, there are no claims on any of these ultra processed foods that lead to health. Zero. And so it's just causing more these seed oils. If you haven't heard about the seed oils, right? These oils that are ultra processed, like, go look. You know that show, like, How Things Are Made? Go look at how industrial oils are processed. They have to be extracted. They use things like formaldehyde and toluene and like benzene, all these unsafe chemicals. We just talked about the chemical industry to extract the oil. And then they have to use perfumes and dyes to make it actually, like, even palatable. And all of that stuff goes in and depletes. We talked about leaky gut. Well, these seed oils, these ultra processed seed oils, lead to leaky gut. So, like, we could go on and on and on. I think you get the point that we need to start paying attention to what is in and on our food, how our food is grown, the chemicals that are in the environment that we are exposed to, how they affect our health negatively, both that of, our families, our children's, and the environment. We know glyphosate, I didn't say this, but glyphosate has been linked to bee colony collapse, right? Like, if we don't have bees, we don't have pollination, we don't have food. Like, we as a species go, "Bah." So, we really, like I said, this is an area that I've become super passionate about. We're going to be talking about more, and we're going to be bringing on guests to talk about this. I'm excited to we've got someone coming to talk about how some of the links to the food, the ultra processed food, is leading to food disorders in children. And that, how are we getting our kids to really eat? But we're not just talking about eating disorders. We're talking about feeding disorders, real things as a result of eating ultra processed food. So super excited about all the things to come. But pay attention to all of that. Start doing your due diligence if you want to do some research. Happy to share where to get that information. So send us comments and questions about that. Again, continue to do this, but really paying attention to all things that affect our food supply, that affect our overall health, and the things that we can do to make a difference in speaking our minds, our voices, and especially with our dollars. So that's a wrap here today for our podcast. I hope you've learned something new. I hope you're fired up to start making some changes. Like I said, like, subscribe, share this information, and we look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. This is your Rebel Nutritionist. Make it a great day.